we get started, you should already have came in muted, but in case you're not, I ask that you do stay muted and keep your webcam off. That way we have a little bit better bandwidth and we can all see and hear a little bit better. Okay. Another thing to mention that this webinar will be recorded for viewing later. We have several presenters lined up for you tonight. Myself, Camilo Acosta, Amy Clow, and Benita Matheson, all with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And additionally, we have Mallory Little and Jennifer from the Washington State Department of Health. This program will begin with a brief introduction on this pest. It will include trapping and future eradication efforts, touch on the proposed quarantine, and kind of end wrapping up with human health factors. If at any of the time you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat box. We may respond to these questions immediately, or we will save them for the end because there will be a chance for people to post questions and us to answer them live. I also did want to briefly mention that Camila will be available if that question perhaps needs translated during that Q&A session. All right, so with that being said, I am actually going to go ahead and roll into what this pest is. So as you can see here on this slide, that is a big close-up picture of that beetle. It has that metallic green color and those copper wing covers. That will really set it aside from other beetles you may see. So the problem with this is it's a scarab beetle native to Japan, so it's considered an invasive species. And what it likes to do is it really likes to eat, okay? It feeds on over 300 types of host plants. And I have a picture of the United States here. You can see the purple area versus the green. Purple, that's where it's established. It started in Riverton, New Jersey in about 1916 and slowly spread halfway across the United States. The picture on the left you see is actually from a resident in the Grandview area who was walking outside summer of 2020 and found the beetles on some of her rose plants. So she took this picture and submitted it to us. So with those beetles, how did they get here? How do they spread? Well, typically Japanese beetles, as they're adults, when we see them out flying around in that summertime, they kind of can transport themselves through air cargo, trucks, or airplanes. Actually, the Department of Agriculture surveys for Japanese beetles every year, placing traps across the United States. And a lot of these traps are placed around those airports and places where they're typically caught. Usually, if a beetle's found, it's considered a one and done. One beetle's found, that beetle's taken care of and it's removed, that place is treated, nothing establishes and moves forward. However, it does get a little bit tricky because they don't just move as adults, they also move as eggs and grubs or larvae. And those are a little bit harder to see because they're beneath the earth's surface. They're either going to be in the soil, they can move with compost or fill. So it's going to be in that dirt. And then essentially if that fill, compost, or potted plants are moved, then the eggs and the larvae are moved with them. Then we get some warmer temperatures, the adult beetles hatch, and then again, they're able to start a population. So with that being said, let's talk about a little bit how they move through their life cycle and how it's a problem. So in the spring, right, we're not going to be seeing those adults above the surface. They're going to be grubs or larvae in the soil. And these are hungry, okay? What they'll do is they will move around beneath the soil, beneath the surface in the dirt, and they'll feast. And they like to eat plant roots, right? And they'll move around for the proper soil and moisture combination and eat those roots of that grass primarily. And then the grass won't be able to uptake any water and it'll die and turn brown. Then as our temperatures get warmer and we get closer into those summer months, those grubs and the larvae turn into pupae, which turn into those adult beetles. And this is when they wreak the havoc on the plants above the surface, skeletonizing leaves. They're also capable of eating the buds of flowers and etc. Now, not only while they're doing this, they're also mating, going back below the surface, laying more eggs, coming up, eating, and continuing that cycle. And then as we start to get a little bit colder, those adults will die. However, those eggs that they laid are going to have hatched, and then we have those grubs again below the surface. So they're going to eat those grass roots even more, causing more damage. Then we get the winter, and then again, they'll wake up in the summer and be hungry again. So this is kind of just a destructive cycle that will continue if not treated. So with that being said, we might not always see those adult beetles because sometimes they're below the surface, but you can potentially see the damage that they cause. So the picture I have over here for you on the left, you can see this is some turf. It might not, and it can also happen to residential lawns as well. But you see the brown spots here on this turf. It's from the damage where the beetles have ate all those roots away. The grass isn't able to uptake water and it's dead. In cases of severe feeding, you can pretty much grab that grass and rip it back, pull it up like you could a piece of carpet. The picture on the right here, you can see how they cause the damage by skeletonizing those leaves. You can see the beetles on there. This is actually a picture from a resident in the Grandview area that the Washington State Department of Agriculture took at a site visit last year. So the last thing I kind of want to touch on you touch for you is we all know that agriculture, right, lawns, our gardens, they can tolerate a limited feeding. But as beetles and other pests continue to feast, that's going to reduce our yield, that's going to reduce our backyard vegetables, and that's going to wreak havoc on our lawn. So I just wanted to point out some of the more common plants that these beetles really like to eat and the things you may see around you, which could include grapes, apples, roses, other fruit trees, hops, and then of course we have that grass. So that is just a super brief background on the beetles and the problems that they have and the havoc that they can cause. And with that being said, I'm going to actually turn it over to Camilo, who can tell you more about the survey process and what WSDA has found and what we're doing. You can tie that into the timeline of the pests to see when things are going to start happening. So with that being said, Camilo, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Cassie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Camilo Acosta. I am the Japanese beetle eradication coordinator with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And like Cassie said, I'm going to be touching on our trapping efforts for this year, and then I'll touch on our eradication efforts as well. So if we rewind a little bit and we talk about what we did in 2020, every year WSDA does do a statewide Japanese beetle survey where we would deploy traps to attempt to detect this pest in our state. In 2020, we deployed about 1,600 of them. Sometime around midsummer, a single beetle was detected in Sunnyside in Yakima County, actually in a Walmart parking lot. Some of you may be familiar with that location. And then during the summer, because we caught that one beetle, we deployed additional traps in the area to try and see are there more? What's the extent of this possible infestation? And then towards the end of the summer in September, we did catch two more beetles in the town of Grandview, actually on Wine Country Road, where there is a rose garden. Cassie, could you switch the slide, please? Thank you. Here you'll see a map of the few catches from 2020. The upper left one is the catch in the Sunnyside Walmart, and then the bottom one is the two beetles that we caught along Wine Country Road in Grandview. Now, as a response to catching these three beetles in 2020, the next year we decided that we definitely needed to up our trapping game and get as many, get a good number of traps out there to try and get kind of a boundary to limit the the extent of the infestation. Go ahead and switch the slide, please. And this is what we ended up doing throughout the 2021 season. As you can see, there's a lot going on in this map, with the green rectangles being locations of actual Japanese beetle traps, and the purple stars representing places where we caught Japanese beetles. And so out of the 1,900 traps that were deployed in the entire state, 900 of them are in this frame that we're looking at right now. And of those 900 traps, about 730 of them caught at least one beetle, with several dozens of these traps catching, hundreds of beetles each. You can barely see it because of all that's going on here, but in the background, you can see that blue grid there represents a 49 square mile area where we were trapping last year. And then as the season went on and we tallied up the beetle counts, we end up at the exact number of beetles that we caught, which was 24,048 beetles. Next slide, please. And so this is the same map, but what we've added here is kind of a heat map with these orange dots, which represent detections of beetles. And this is these dots are graduated. And so that means the bigger the dot is on that map, it goes from being a dot to being a circle, really. It represents, a larger number of beetle catches. So you'll see that there's definitely an obvious area right in the center of town there where we're catching hundreds and hundreds of beetles per trap. Um, Next slide, please. And if we take away those orange dots and just leave the heat map, and then we zoom in a little bit more, we land on a pretty clear hotspot or core area where there's a large presence of these beetles. And this area is pretty much, oh, I don't know why my camera switched to, that was really strange. So in this heat map, we can see that along north to south on Euclid Street, where Grandview High School, Grandview Middle School, and elementary schools are, as well as Euclid Park, all the way down to Fifth, and then east and west along Fifth are as what we've been calling, the hot spot for right now, because you know out of the 24,000, a large majority were caught in this core area here. And if you could change the slide, please. So, as a result of catching this many beetles, and we kind of had a consistent shape along all of those different images of, kind of what the boundaries of the infestation were. But even with that, and even though we caught 24,000 beetles, we still want to make that trapping range a little bit larger. I don't know if you can all still hear me. My screen has frozen.
Hi, Camila. I can personally still hear you. You might just want to try turning off your video and
That's
see
what I'm
if
gonna.
that will help with the bandwidth.
That's what I'm gonna do. If my whole program doesn't close here. Sorry, everyone.
Alrighty. It looks like Camilo is having a little bit of trouble with his internet connection, and we're missing a little bit of feedback from him right now. So we're just going to go ahead and continue on with the program presentation. Again, if you have questions, feel free to place them in the chat box, and he will come back on, I'm sure, by the end to answer questions if there are any. So this is a map here of the potentially proposed eradication. You can see it's going to be within that same target area of the Grandview, in the same area that we are trapping. It's expected to cover up to those 4,400 properties over those a little bit over 3,000 square acres. What WSDA is doing is we're going to be contracting pesticide applicators to do this process. Okay, these applicators will be licensed, and what they will be doing is they will be applying a targeted application of a celloprint insecticide and potentially a liquid and granular formula to treat those residencies. It will be applied to the surface where it will seep in and target the beetles below the surface. As the beetles consume this, they will then prosper and die. The goal for this treatment is to apply that between the months of April and September. So this is kind of a zoomed in map of what it looks like when we are going in and we are looking at the different residences and the landowners for the targeted areas. Obviously, the grass needs to be targeted, versus treating an area of asphalt is not going to reach below the surface and hit those beetles. So you can see here, this is kind of a zoomed in where you see all the parcels are laid out. What will happen is these landowners will be contacted with a letter via their mail, and it will explain the treatment process and ask for their permission to treat. From that point on, the contractors will take over the treatment process, treating the front and backyards of the property. Basically, this means that access to the property will be needed. And based on your area, the treatment could take anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes. You do not need to be home for the contractor to come through and treat your property. So moving forward a little bit and showing you what this is going to look like. Residents of Grandview in that proposed treatment area should be on the lookout for a piece of mail hitting your mailbox soon, or people that are potentially leasing land in the area. What this letter will say is, we are getting ready to perform this eradication, and we would like your permission to treat your land and treat your residents at no cost. Okay. This letter will have further detailed instructions on how you can give us consent. But basically what we're asking is for you to review that letter and then send us back permission to go in and treat your property. On the letter, you will have a unique PIN. So you will take that letter with your unique PIN and go to our website. You can type that in as easy as 123. Then you can click a button to give treatment consent and submit that form. If you like to do things a little bit more on a hard copy, you're more than welcome to fill that form out. And then there's actually a box that you're able to drop it off at the City Hall in Grandview. Okay. So you're in the Grandview area and you're gonna be in one of those residents looking for in that proposed eradication. Again, be looking in your mailboxes because this form is coming. It's really important that we get these forms back so we can perform this eradication and get rid of this pest. Last thing to reiterate, you don't have to be home for the treatment, but you can help us by preparing the property. So if you know that we're going to be coming through and treating and you are able to unlock the gate, so that if we need to access your backyard, so be it. Again, for some safety, we do ask that you secure all your pets indoors. We don't really want them getting out and running loose from your property. If you happen to have some bigger toys out there, some dog bowls, and you're able to pick those up before we can come through, that's also always a help. Okay. Again, you just have a smaller yard, obviously your treatment's going to be shorter, but if your yard is a little bit bigger, that's going to take a little bit more time. So just to reiterate, those forms are going to be hitting your mailbox, okay? And you can use those forms that will have detailed instructions how you can go online to give permission, or you can take that form and you can drop it off at the Grandview City Hall. Staff from the WSDA will also make themselves available through at different places at different places in Grandview, as well as going around and collecting forms physically. Again, if you have any questions on that process, Camilo Acosta is our Japanese beetle eradication coordinator. You can feel free to reach out to contact him directly if you please. His email is down there at the bottom. But again, we will have time for questions at the end, as well as keep throwing them in the chat box. So that's kind of how the process, we're looking to start on the process and get it rolling. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Amy with the Washington State Department of Agriculture, so she can touch and talk a little bit on the proposed internal quarantine and what that is all about. So with that being said, go ahead, Amy.
Thanks, Cassie. Yeah, and I'll keep my video on, so hopefully the bandwidth stays with us. So hi, everyone. My name's Amy Clow. I'm the Quarantine and Rules Coordinator with the Plant Protection Division. So for those of you who don't know, WSDA is considering expanding the Japanese beetle quarantine to include portions of Yakima and Benton counties. There currently is a quarantine in place for Japanese beetle. However, this is an exterior quarantine. What we're proposing would be an internal quarantine. So this quarantine would basically cover a 49 square mile area in the southeastern corner of Yakima County and the southwestern corner of Benton County. And you can see a picture of what that quarantine area might look like on the slide here. So the proposed quarantine area would basically prohibit specific items that are located inside of the quarantine area from being transported outside of it. These items would be things that pose a high risk for transporting Japanese beetle. So this would be things like yard debris or yard waste, as well as things like turf grass, stuff like that. So the reason we're proposing this quarantine is it's all being done in an effort to prevent Japanese beetle from being transported or spread to other parts of Washington. Next slide. So in order to put this quarantine in place, we have to go through the rulemaking process. So I just kind of wanted to give a quick overview of what that process looks like and sort of where we're at within that process. So the first step in the rulemaking process is the CR 101, and this is basically just gathering general information and getting a basic idea of what the rule might look like. So we have completed this step of the rulemaking process with the proposed quarantine, and we've started moving on to the second phase of the process, which is the CR 102. So during this phase of the rulemaking process, we start drafting the rule language, and we also start gathering information from stakeholders and surveying stakeholders, trying to get a better understanding of how the rule might impact them, as well as trying to see what the proposed rule might look like in practice. We also start writing a small business economic impact statement. And what this is basically we do an analysis to try to figure out what the financial impact the proposed rule might have on businesses. We look at things like if there's going to be a loss in revenue or if there's any additional costs that might be associated with the proposed rule. We also look to see if there's going to be a disproportionate impact to small businesses. And this is the part of the rulemaking process that we're currently in. We're currently working on drafting all of these documents and drafting the rule language as well as the small business economic impact statement. So the next stage of the process is the public hearing. And so this is when the public can submit written or verbal comments on the rule, whether they're in support of the rule or opposed to it. They can submit written comments anytime after the CR 102 has been filed, or they can submit verbal comments during the public hearing. So after the public hearing is the final stage of the rulemaking process, which is the CR 103. And for this stage, we review all the comments that we received, and we put together a concise explanatory statement that basically addresses all of the comments and concerns that we might receive. And then after that, we file the CR 103. And once the CR 103 is filed, the rule is adopted. And generally, after the CR 103 is filed, the rule will take effect 31 days after that. So there's a lot of different steps to the rulemaking process. Right now, we're in the step that takes the longest amount of time. But since we are currently in the process where we're gathering information from stakeholders, if you're a business owner and you think you might be impacted by the proposed quarantine, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you and just get some more information on how you might be impacted. If you're interested in learning more information about the proposed quarantine or following along with where we're at in the rulemaking process, please visit our website. The URL's on the screen there. And definitely reach out if you want to be notified as we move forward with the rulemaking process. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Benita, who's going to give you a little bit more detail on what the proposed quarantine might look like.
Hi. Oops, hold on. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Amy. Hi, my name's Benita Matheson, and I'm with the Washington State Department of Agriculture Plant Services. And our division will mostly be working with any licensed nurseries that are selling plants in the proposed quarantine zone. And what that'll look like is that any nursery stock or plant material that's coming out of the quarantine zone would need to be inspected during the flight season, which I think is going to be May 15th through October 15th. And it'll have to be safeguarded and to make sure that those adults are not getting spread out outside of Washington State. And right now, Washington State is a Category 1 state, which means we don't have any restrictions for our plant material going out into other states. But other states that are category 2s that might have a possible infestation have to give us notification that they're coming in. So anything that is coming from the proposed quarantine plant material will have to have some type of notification to ensure that we know that it's clean. Next slide. Oh, next slide, Cassie.
Sorry about that, Benita. Here you go.
Oh, nope, that's okay. So as Amy has said, that we have been getting stakeholder information and gathering all of that, all of their input. And because of that, we have found that grapefruits and tree fruits harvested during the adult flight season are not going to be posing a really, it's really low risk for moving adult beetles. But and also we did some outreach to the dairies, and we have found that dairy compost and manure commercially processed and corn silage, shucked corn ears would not pose a risk for moving Japanese beetle because of how the processes are done. But these exemptions could change, and kind of based on ongoing evidence and research that we will be doing. What will be affected again is hop vines that are being moved from the proposed quarantine area outside, and any fresh corn that is being harvested within the quarantine zone. So if you do happen to be one of those producers of those regulated articles that we're proposing, please contact us and give us some of that information that you might have that would help. Next slide. And so again, we are considering restricting the movement of the topsoil, grass, weeds from residential, agricultural, and commercial properties, any yard debris that you may have, all plants and bulbs, crowns with roots, unless they are bare roots, but any potted nursery stock, if you're moving plants from your home that is within the quarantine zone, outside of the quarantine zone, you would really want to contact WSDA and have those inspected to make sure that you're not transporting grubs. Hop vines again and unshucked corn ears harvested during the adult flight season. You could move that stuff if you are trapping your entire field and treated prior to harvest. And that is something that we're still working on with our rulemaking. And then any other article or means of conveyance that poses a risk of spreading Japanese beetle would be regulated. Next slide.
All right, Benita, thank you. Again, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat box. I saw a couple coming in and coming through. With that being said, though, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Mallory with the Department of Health. Go ahead, Mallory.
Thanks, Cassie, for inviting us today to talk a bit about the Department of Health's involvement with the Japanese beetle program. Everyone, my name is Mallory Little, and I go by she, her pronouns, and I am a toxicologist at the Department of Health, and I will be talking about our public safety evaluation of the acelepryn G and acelepryn pesticides. My colleague Jennifer Sievert is with our pesticide program and is also here to answer any additional questions at the end of the presentation. So a few words about me before we move on. I work for the Department of Health as a toxicologist on a variety of projects such as health assessments, and currently I occasionally support the pesticide program on toxicological issues. I was invited to give a brief overview on the safety of acelepryn G and acelepryn for Japanese beetle control. So feel free to go to the next slide. So as previously discussed, the Washington State Department of Agriculture proposes to treat the entire area of Grandview, Washington to address an outbreak of Japanese beetles. The WSDA is going to treat these areas by applying acelepryn G, which is the granular form of the pesticide, to soil. The liquid form of this pesticide, called acelepryn, will be applied as a spray a few months later to only the areas with the most Japanese beetles. So what ingredients are in these pesticides? Both the granular and the liquid forms of the pesticide contain the active ingredient chlorantraniliprole, which is a member of a new class of pesticides that are very selective in that they paralyze the muscles of insects but not mammals. This active ingredient is selective for insect receptors only, rather than the receptors found in mammals and humans. In addition to the active ingredient, acelepryn G, which is the granular form of the pesticide, contains limestone clay, which is a type of mineral, and a binder ingredient which binds the active ingredient to the limestone clay. Acelepryn is formulated slightly differently because it is a spray. In addition to the active ingredient, it contains very small amounts of two preservatives. It's important to note that while some people are sensitive to preservatives, allergic reactions have not been reported in people exposed to acelepryn. The full ingredient list is withheld from the public as confidential business information of acelepryn. However, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, reviewed the ingredient list and concluded acelepryn is not hazardous to humans or domestic animals. Additionally, EPA reviewed both acelepryn G and acelepryn pesticides and placed them in the reduced risk category. So this means that by using these pesticides, it is the least toxic approach because they pose less of a risk to human health and the environment than other pesticides used for beetle eradication. Overall, acelepryn G and acelepryn have a good safety record. Additionally, they won't harm other types of non-target insects, fish, or birds. Next slide, please. So no studies on the effects of human exposures to acelepryn G or acelepryn have been conducted. However, we found one case report describing a poisoning with a similar pesticide in 2016 in a 26-year-old woman in India. She intentionally consumed a whole bottle of DuPont Coragen, which contains the same active ingredient as acelepryn, and this led to a slower heartbeat and heart block. These symptoms were treated and she experienced no other health effects. No other studies examining the effects of the active ingredient in humans were located. We also looked at health studies of the active ingredient of these pesticides conducted in animals. The active ingredient did not cause cancer, irritation, or allergies in these studies. Next slide. Concerning pesticide illness cases from 2010 to the present, no cases of illness from exposure to either the granular form acelepryn G or the spray acelepryn have been reported in Washington or in Oregon. We located one report of illness in 2013 to an applicator from a similar pesticide called Altacor. This similar pesticide contains the same active ingredient as acelepryn. The applicator experienced nausea and dizziness. However, the case was deemed unlikely to have resulted from exposure to that pesticide. Next slide, please. So the bottom line is we do not expect illness in the general population following spraying with acelepryn or application of the granular form acelepryn G. However, because we can't rule out that there could be symptoms related to allergy due to the inert ingredients in acelepryn, we encourage people to still minimize their exposure to the spray droplets. So as a precaution, we suggest you stay inside for 4 hours after acelepryn has been sprayed to allow the bulk of the treatment spray to dry. Additionally, wash with soap and water if direct contact to skin or clothes occurs. Wash your clothes if contact occurs to your clothes. And while we don't expect eating produce grown in pesticide-treated soil to cause health effects, if you still want to minimize your exposure, take steps to avoid surface water runoff from the treated areas into home gardens. Next slide, please. So lastly, if you have any questions or concerns after this presentation, feel free to call the phone numbers listed below. So to report a suspected illness, please call the DOH pesticide program. If you are experiencing any symptoms, please call your doctor or the Washington Poison Center for free, immediate expert advice and assistance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I have also included my work phone number at the bottom for any additional questions you may have in the future. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mallory. Okay, so I am just going to go ahead and take this back over and just kind of give you a little bit left to leave with. So again, if you are in that Grandview area, be prepared for those letters to hit your mailbox. They should start hitting your mailbox next week in March. Okay. The other thing is we all need to work together to stop this pest. So a couple things we can do is keep our eyes out for those Japanese beetles. And if we think we've seen one, the best thing you can do is to report it. And all you have to do is you can go online, snag a picture on your phone. You can upload that to our website. You can even shoot it in an email to the pest program, or you can go ahead and call it in. So that helps us keep track of these beetles and make sure they're not spreading. That way we're protecting all our agriculture, all our home gardens, and all our residences in Washington State. With that being said, there's a couple more ways you can connect and keep going on connect with what's going on in the beetle world. We have a website devoted solely to the Japanese beetle. It's agr.wa.gov/beetles. There's a Facebook group if you like connecting with others and keeping track, chatting on what's going on. You can also sign up for email alerts on WSDA's website. I do send out emails probably about monthly during the busy seasons, a little bit less slacks over the winter, but those go out to your email in an HTML, as well as are available in a PDF viewing on the website. So with that being said, there are some questions that came through in the chat box. If you have questions now, go ahead and post them. I will go ahead and read some of the questions that came through earlier that may have not have been answered. Panelists, if you feel the need to answer it at this time, go ahead and unmute yourself and answer the question. So there was a question asked early on in the webinar regarding compost. It was just regarding asking if Japanese beetles can survive the composting process if temperatures in the compost reach above 131 degrees Fahrenheit. So Japanese beetles, they do have a certain threshold at a certain temperature where they will die through the composting process. The other thing to think about is there's a difference between compost that first say comes from a dairy facility or kind of like manure in a field versus someone's backyard compost that they might have regarding their food. So the Japanese beetles, if the compost is typically kind of missing a lot of foliage or it's coming straight from that dairy facility, it's not really inept or apt to have the greenery in it to support those Japanese beetles. So there was another question asking about the REI for the insecticide, and that was actually answered in the chat box in a long, detailed meeting. But just to reiterate, it's about 4 hours for non-agricultural use. Their worker protection standard for this ag pesticide is 40 CFR per 170. You'll have to get on to look for the WPS when applying, okay? Following that, there is a question regarding what about hop material that is run through a combine prior to leaving the field. So I do want to mention that as the WSDA, we are pretty active right now in working with the Hop Commission, working with the different hop growers as we're moving through this process. If you recall, Amy described there's this thing called the SBIS. So we're working on getting information from them and applying that to practices to see how we can work together to mitigate the transfer of Japanese beetles, as well as mitigate and keep the eradication process moving forward. So that questions to that answer is still somewhat being discussed. Okay. There is another question in the chat box asking if we are planning to enlarge the trapping area this year. So as far as
Carla,
trapping,
or, Cassie, I can answer if you want.
all right.
Hi, Sven Spiescher with WSDA. I'm the managing entomologist and oversee a lot of the programs for the state. Trapping for Japanese beetle, we follow something called the National Harmonization Plan, where we have made an agreement with other states. And the reason we do this is so that nurseries and other folks who are trying to sell plants and other products out of the state are in agreement with other states that what we have done actually does give them a clear idea of what is going on in our state. Right now, the standard is if we find a single beetle in a 1 square mile grid, then we're unfortunately stuck doing 49 traps in that grid. And adjacent grids, it is 25 traps per grid. And then if you go out 2 grids from that, it is an additional 5 traps per grid. And so that will be our typical response. We will meet that as a minimum. If it makes sense to us to eliminate a grid, say because there aren't any plants there, or for example, to add additional traps because we're just getting too many in a certain area so we can have a better idea of what's going on, that is the approach we will take. But what we are required to do is basically a minimum of 49 traps per square mile in a grid that has a beetle, and adjacent grids to that, 25 traps per grid, and then 2 miles out from that, we're required to do 5 traps per grid. And in addition to the Grandview area, Ryan Wojon has been running a statewide survey. It's the survey that actually detected this first and caused us to pour outreach and trapping in the area. And he will be trapping all over the state in a much, a smaller percentage per grid, if you will. Something we didn't mention is that we also get hits or one and done hits every year kind of near major transportation facilities. And these usually resolve themselves just by trapping. But unfortunately here in Grandview, our trapping uncovered an active population, which is why we're taking eradication activities here. Sorry, Cassie, a little long-winded.
Perfect. That probably clarified some other questions. We talked about kind of the heat process, but there's actually a question regarding a little bit of cold. So if beetles did potentially end up transporting with fruit for, say, apple in an apple bin at harvest, would they be able to survive the temperatures in cold storage?
We have not looked into that at this time.
Thank you. And so
Hey, Cassie, this is Ryan. If the beetle did, we're concerned about the larva. So if a beetle did get was on the apples and it got into the warehouse, it's not the worst thing right there. But if there's a bunch of soil surrounding the warehouse and plants and everything where the beetle could lay eggs, that's a big problem. So that's what we're looking at there.
awesome. Thank you. Okay, presenters, switch your minds over to yard waste. There has been a couple questions coming through the chat box as well on YouTube Live. Residents are wondering what they should be doing with their yard waste, as well as like roses and annuals that may be discarded, if they can go into yard garbage pickup, or what they should be planning on doing with their yard waste.
I can answer that, Cassie, now that I'm back on, if you guys can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. So for a typical homeowner that's, trying to get rid of clippings from rose bushes or other bushes or grass clippings, things like that, we're gonna ask that they, help us work with landscaping companies in the area. If you hire a landscaper, letting them know, what they know about the proposed quarantine now. We're working on plans with the city of Grandview to establish some kind of yard waste drop-off that will be free to residents, because we're going to encourage them as much as we can to bring that waste to us instead of transporting it outside of the quarantine area, so that we can go through the proper steps to ensure that that waste is pest-free before it is disposed of. The news on that will go out soon, and until then, if you have things, larger woody debris, or now that if it starts warming up a bit and you have clippings, not clippings, but branches and things like that, that you do please keep them on site if you are able. It's not a big deal now, but once the middle of May hits, it will be a bigger deal to please keep that waste on site, or let your landscaper know about our drop-off locations once we do get those organized.
Awesome, thank you. There is a question about what do the Japanese beetle traps look like? Basically, if you go online and you just Google Japanese beetle traps, you'll see a couple different varieties. Sometimes they'll come through as a green bucket or a plastic disposable bag. They're pretty selective. Sometimes they smell really nice like roses. You hang them up and the beetles, if they're present, they'll be attracted into them. Amber also posted a link to what one of them might look like. Presenters, thinking about kind of the treatment areas. There's a question about some of the proposed treatment areas. There may have been a couple parks and a school that wasn't exactly outlined in the yellow. So what is the treatment with that going to happen, as well as, I guess, go ahead and answer that first fold of the question first.
So I don't know if you guys went to that slide, or but yeah, those larger properties that weren't residential, those schools, parks, businesses, areas with along sidewalks or medians that we call right-of-way areas. Those areas, if they belong to the city or the county, we've been working with them or the school district. We've been working with them to see if they can help us out a bit and actually put down some kind of treatment themselves. And it's just going to help us take a couple, a little bit off that acreage number there. And yeah, we're working with them to see if they'll treat themselves.
Yeah, we have some awesome stakeholders within the city of Grandview who are really helping to push that word out and get the word forward, and really want to help rid of this pest. So thank you for all of you that have been working together with us on that. If there's any last minute questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat box. At this point in time, we have covered the rest of the questions. Again, if you have any that you may have not been able to get to, or you would like to go through more in depth, go ahead and feel free to email the pest program. It's down there at the bottom, or give us a phone call.
Hey, Cassie, there's one in there that we missed. Does the Celloprint only target adults? And so
Okay.
I can cover that. So depends on how you're applying it and what you're targeting. So Celloprint G, which is a granular, which is an option for our contractors. That one is specifically not targeting adults at all. It's targeting the larvae as they feed below, the surface of the soil. We can do a foliar spray, which some other programs like in Oregon and Idaho have used, in California as well. And that's one of the liquid formulations. And that would go right onto foliage from a tree or a shrub or rose bushes. And that one does target the adults and will kill them as they're feeding. So I hope that answers your question.
Great answer, Sven. Okay, a couple more questions came in. Have any beetles been trapped in Franklin County? The answer to that is yes. There were a couple beetles right on the edge of or Benton, sorry, not in Franklin. No beetles have been reported in Franklin County. There's a question, Amy, this one's probably going to be for you. When will the CR 102 period be done?
Hi, yeah, that's a good question. So we don't have a tentative date for when the CR 102, we're going to file the CR 102 at this time. It'll probably be, we're looking to hopefully file it maybe like early April or so, or early to late April. But yeah, at this time it's really tentative. It really depends on you know, the information we're gathering from stakeholders and a lot of other factors. But I definitely recommend, if you're interested in getting updates, to reach out to us. We'll put you on the stakeholder list and we'll send regular updates on where we're at with the rulemaking process.
Thank you. Sven or Ryan, do you have any insight on Oregon or California or other state programs that have been successful in eradicating infestations, and any insight on that?
Yeah, hey, this is Ryan. Idaho has just a couple years ago, they finished eradicating this pest in Boise. Pretty large infestation there. Oregon's in the process of eradication right now in an area called Cedar Mills, which is northwest of Portland. And pretty large infestation. They've been going at it for, I guess, about 4 years now. And their numbers are going down now. But you know, the sites they're kind of popping up, just kind of little areas here and there, and it kind of points to why the quarantine that we're going to have, because we got to contain it, and that's the problem they're having, is containing it into that area. California has eradicated it just using a foliar spray, or the foliar acelepryn. Let's see, there's Utah. They had they're still working on some stuff, but they had an eradication going on. Montana, they just don't have money to do anything. Up in Vancouver, BC, they're in the midst of eradicating in a couple areas. So it's all over the place. But this is the biggest eradication project in the country. So could feel good about that.
Awesome, thank you. There were a couple questions about applications and when they'll be beginning. It was answered in the chat box, but kind of just to reiterate, the question was to assume applications for granular and later foliar, when will they begin? If Camila, if you don't want to verbally answer that for a couple of our call-in users.
Yeah, sure. So applications of either formulation of acelepryn will begin in late April to control grubs, and then later in the season during June we will start applying the liquid formula as a foliar spray once adult beetles become active.
Perfect, thank you. I have a question here in the chat about if we know the effects of non-target insects, especially pollinators.
I can answer that question. This is Mallory Little. So luckily, chlorantraniliprole is a very selective pesticide, and EPA concluded that it is non-toxic to bees. And I found a study from the Department of Entomology at the University of Nebraska that studied the active ingredients effects on adult honeybees, and it found that the active ingredient is relatively safe at recommended label concentrations. Thank you for your question. It's very important to protect our pollinators.
Awesome. Okay, well, we have about 5 minutes left within the hour. The questions have slowed to come in though, so I'm going to actually go ahead and wrap this up a little bit early. Again, thank you all for coming to and attending our webinar. Again, remember, if you happen to think you see Japanese beetle, to go ahead and report it. If you're a resident within that Grandview area, be on the lookout for that piece of mail coming into your mailbox. If there happens to be any representatives from the media on this who wants to follow further up, please go ahead and contact the appropriate agency media contacts. So thank you for your support from the public, and we look forward to potentially eradicating this pest and keeping it out of Washington State. Thank you and have a nice night.